After 5 years of battling terminal cancer, Hiraku's last flame of life was extinguished, and his soul entered the heavenly realm. Having lived 39 years filled with betrayal and suffering, the god of the world apologized for accidentally giving him such a horrible life. So to make up for his blunder, the god will give him a second life with a healthy body, and promises to grant him any wish. The only thing Hiraku's ever desired was to be reborn as a farmer in a secluded area. Wanting to aid him in his journey, God gave him the most overpowered tool in this universe, the almighty farming tool. With a single tap, his flame burns brightly once more, and Hiraku wakes up in the middle of a forest. As he moves his body for the first time in years, he realizes that this is everything he's ever wished for. And with the almighty farming tool appearing in his hand, he begins using his new body to mend the ground. While cultivating the field, he notices that he never feels tired using the tool. Still, he needed to find a nice area for his farm, so he searched the entire forest until he found a giant tree to call home. There were no rivers or ponds anywhere in the forest, so to quench his thirst, Hiraku decided to dig a well for some water. His almighty farming tool transformed into a shovel, and allowed him to dig deep into the earth until a puddle of water started forming. With a source of water secured, he began clearing the land until he found a tree that was blocking him from cultivating. With the knowledge of his previous life, he tried cutting it down strategically, but with a single slash of his almighty axe, the tree fell down instantly, and he ran before it crushed him. Now that he's gotten his first oak log, he turned it into 4 oak planks using his mallet. After converting all the logs into planks with his crafting table, the sun began setting and he panicked to try and get some fire. But without any firewood, he spent the entire night carving a hole into the giant tree. At first, he thought he could have just built a dirt shack, but remembered that Newton invented gravity in this world, so he didn't want to bury himself alive. The next morning, he gathered firewood and started his first fire to avoid the same mistake. It's been more than a day of clearing all the trees in the distance, but Hiraku hasn't been tired or hungry once. This was the power of his almighty tool, and just as he was about to continue clearing the forest, a monster rabbit rushed towards him, but with his mighty stick, he ended it instantly. While eating the skewers, he feels guilty for ending the rabbit, but wishes he had a hoe to eat the food with. Sorry, I meant he wishes he had a hoe to make food with. After eating the food, it had to come out some way, so Hiraku created an innovative toilet along with shelter for privacy. With everything finally settled, he began cultivating the land and spent the rest of the day wondering what vegetables he should plant first. By the time he was finished, it was already late, so he decided to explore for seeds the next day. But in the morning, the land already had plants sprouting. It made no sense how plants could grow from nothing, and Hiraku thought that this was a side effect from his farming tool. Regardless of how they appeared, he began creating a fence to protect them from the zombies at night, and dug out a mound to keep all the creepers out. The process took a few days, but after finally finishing the perimeter, Hiraku noticed the plants have been growing at an incredible speed. With all the spare wood, he decided to create a small log house and used his carpenting skills to create a nice roof, increasing his civilization level. After a few more days of expanding his farm, Hiraku saw a couple of wolves who were very injured, so he tried bringing them inside. With the leftover meat from the giant boar he defeated, Hiraku fed them, but noticed one of them was pregnant. As a child, his sole wish was to have a dog, so he wished for them to keep him company. But the female started going into labor, trying to give them protection. He brought them into the log house and created a fire to keep them warm when the sun set. After a long sleepless night, Hiraku came to see 4 little puppies feeding. To celebrate her healthy birth, he gave them the tastiest meat he'd gathered. A while passed and the dogs stuck around inside his hut, so Hiraku decided to build a new house right next to them. By the time the puppies started running around, his plants were ready for harvest, and he noticed that tomatoes were the first ones to finally produce fruit. He offered some of them to his dogs and named the male Kuro and the female Yuki. After a few weeks, Hiraku learned all the secrets behind his almighty farming tool. While thinking about potatoes, the almighty tool planted potato seeds through magic, so he used this trick to create all the foods he's ever wanted. And on top of that, anything he grew with his almighty tool would grow much faster than it normally would. Grateful for the fact that the gods gave him such an overpowered item, Hiraku created 2 statues to commemorate them. That afternoon, he realized that his diet was getting very repetitive, so he decided to begin planting some trees. They may take years to start producing fruit, but the wait will be worth it. As weeks passed, the wolves started growing horns, and they had found a waterfall 30 minutes away. Although creating a canal would make obtaining fresh water much easier, the distance he would have to dig was too long, so he decided to focus on his base for the time being. The farm was growing steadily, and he had begun adding a variety of plants like wheat and sugarcane to sustain him. But while months of progress passed, Hiraku began losing track of days and the winter was fast approaching. There's no chance he could continue farming in this state, and the pelt from the giant rabbits smelled awful as it began rotting. To prepare for the winter, he began gathering food and firewood, but one day, Kuro brought him over to meet a giant spider. With the silk from its tail, it was able to produce a handkerchief with detailed embroidery. It became the new citizen in his small farm, and produced all the textiles in exchange for some potatoes. Whether he needed a coat for the winter, a bed stuffed with leaves, or curtains to block out the cold wind, the spider, Zabuton, produced everything he ever needed. His small hut was slowly starting to become more civilized, and so winter finally arrived. With the fireplace he had built, he was able to survive the harsh cold nights. Still, regardless of whether he was surviving, he was starting to get awfully lonely, worrying that he would forget how to talk to someone. When the long winter passed and spring finally came, the wolf children had grown and decided to leave the nest. But a few days later, they came back with partners. One of them even beat up a lackey wolf and won the girl over like a gigachat. But they weren't the only ones with surprises, because the spider came back with her own children. All of their families were getting bigger, so Hiraku began farming so he can feed them. But as he farmed, the spider began sounding the alarm. Kuro ran towards the source along with Hiraku, and in the middle of the forest, they found a silver-haired girl crying. All of the animals were apprehensive and she tried asking him for help, so Hiraku approached her. But as he tried to cover her, he fell for her trap, and the girl jumped towards him to take a bite of his neck, transforming into a plot-filled vampire. The wolves attacked her right away and began destroying her, causing her to transform back into her little form. He wondered if she was his enemy, but the girl said the reason she had to suck his blood was to recover her energy before withering away. Feeling bad for how hard his dogs had beaten her up, he offered her a bite of his neck, and she began sucking his she began sucking his blood. She transformed back into a bigger version of herself, but Hiraku remembered her being taller and having more plot, so he told her to hurry the up and suck more of his blood so he can see her giant plot again. After sucking all of his bodily fluid, Hiraku showed her around his farm. It was her first time seeing these abnormal fruits, and when she took a bite of them, she thought they were delicious. He was glad someone was enjoying his food, because for the first time, he'd found a person he could enjoy spending time with in this lonely world. Back at his house, he's realized that today has been full of surprises, and wonders if something like this would ever happen again. Her name was Lululasi, and she asked him if she can come to visit him in the future. But he had a different request, and asked her if she would stay with him here forever. He doesn't want it to be just a one-night stand because her pussy hit different, and Lu thinks that he's trying to propose to her. He doesn't want to let this chance go away and doesn't care if she's a vampire. He doesn't know how many more years he can handle being alone. She tells him that it's just so sudden because she wasn't expecting a marriage proposal, but Hiraku realizes that she misunderstood what he actually meant. After understanding that he was actually proposing, he decided to double down, begging her to marry him. Lu smiles at him, saying that she wants to stay with him forever. He drags her to bed for another one-night stand. The next day, he used the long stick on his hoe to cultivate babies with his new hoe. They sit next to each other and stare at the trees growing, but the spider begins ringing the alarm again. Hiraku runs over and wonders why he's feeling deja vu. He frees the angel girl and thinks that this story is about to get real interesting with all the plot development. Lu tries sneaking away, but the angel girl has finally found her and is ready to come drag her away, so the dogs eat her out.
What do you mean by that?
She's surprised Lu has been hiding inside the forest and is angry that she climaxed after the dogs ate her out. Lu is also angry that she climaxed when the dogs ate her out, and Hiraku wonders why getting injured would lead to them climaxing. The angel girl wonders who this man is, and Lu blushingly introduces him as her husband. While her face burns redder than a tomato, Giant Plot Cannons introduces herself as Tia, and she's come to find Lu because there's a bounty on her head. She was constantly researching different concoctions and kept blowing up the kingdom whenever something didn't go her way. Who reveals this was the reason she was in the middle of the forest on that day, so she bent over the table and asked Tia if she would like to start living here. She promises to show her all of the crops, like Hiraku's eggplant next to their round peaches.
Out of pocket for that shit.
way out of pocket.
Lu goes on to show her around the farm, and Hiraku tries to teach her how to cut cabbage out. After cutting it, he prepared it as a meal and sprinkled some salt on it before handing it to her. She thought it was delicious, and after a long day of farming, they cleaned themselves up using their magical abilities. Inside his house, she tried strawberries for the first time, and Lu told her that they'll be showing her how to make a strawberry cream pie next. She grabbed onto her arms, begging her to live here with them because her body can't handle everything if she's alone. This was the beginning of their life together. Tia thinks she's enjoyed the strawberry cream pie, so she asks him for more strawberries, but Hiraku thinks expanding even more right now would result in spoiled food. While they continued walking, Hiraku noticed Kuro's new puppies and decided to build a stable for them in the open field next to their farm. After he was done, he noticed all of Zabuton's children casting their silk to fly away. At the same time, Tia told him that she's also going to be leaving for a while, and started flying away on her wings. A few days later, Tia came back and brought even more girls to add to the harem. They're high elves, because they have giant plots, and all of them introduce themselves. They're also all related, so incest is going to prevail in this plot. Hiraku wonders why there aren't any guy elves, but Tia reveals the sad reality they've had to endure. During the last Great War, their entire male population was destroyed, and they've been roaming the woods until now. Their only wish is to repopulate now, and beg Hiraku to help them out. With the village's population increasing, Hiraku began building them a house for all of them to live together. Their skills in construction and woodworking allowed them to build the house within just 10 days, and they thought it's much nicer than Hiraku's dirt shack. However, at the very least, he wishes that in this spacious house, they can feel safe and at peace. As the days pass, the elf leader wants to thank him for letting them stay here by mining and blacksmithing for him, so they begin building a furnace in the earth. After processing the iron, Hiraku sees the metal pots they've created, and they tell him that they can do all kinds of things after living in the wild for 200 years. Still, the only thing they've wished to be able to do was to settle down and reproduce.
じゃあ一つはクリアだな。
Hiraku thought it would be for the best to avoid having plot development with all the elves, and stayed a typical anime protagonist. While farming one day, the elf girls noticed that he has a giant wheat field, and one of them asked him if she could make some bread, telling him she has the rarest yeast in the lands. Hiraku was excited, so the girls began baking bread and turned it into breadsticks for Hiraku to try out. At the same time, they all wonder if Hiraku's plot is this long and tasty. Now that he's finally able to make some bread, he would like to expand the wheat fields, but he realizes that their expansion is starting to get out of control. He asks Lu who owns this land, and she tells him that while nobody owns it, it's probably under the Demon Lord's control. However, since he created all of this land without support, this land belongs to Hiraku. At night, the girls gather and wonder how Hiraku's been able to tame the Inferno Wolves and the Demon Spider. Even these crops shouldn't be able to grow in this soil, and they begin wondering why he has no knowledge about their world. At the same time, Hiraku's realized that he hasn't been building the waterway in a long time, so he decides to make it tomorrow's mission. In the morning, Hiraku sees Zabuton pointing towards a queen bee, and Hiraku decides to build a bee house for them to create honey for him. He spends the entire afternoon preparing a reservoir. They began mass-producing the concrete waterway. The elf girls bent over to make sure that all of them were placed in the correct spot. While they focused on doing the hard things, Hiraku filled all of their holes with his hard hammer. Because of their efficiency, the waterway was finished within a single day, and the reservoir was already filled. This should allow them to water the crops a lot easier, but Hiraku noticed that the reservoir was also getting him fish without doing any work. He thought that even though the rabbits were dangerous in this forest, at least the fish were peaceful. But a giant fish nearly devoured him right then. The girls saw him cooking the fish, and knowing that it was from the Forest of Death, they wondered if it was truly safe to eat. Hiraku finished preparing it and tried giving them some, but they told him that they wanted a different kind of meaty dinner. Hiraku had no idea what type of meat they were talking about, so he began eating it and thought it was delicious. Both of the girls tried it and thought it was delicious, and the rest of the elves wanted some of his meat. Giggity. To satisfy all of them, Hiraku began capturing more fish and preserving them with salt. Wishing to expand their diet, Hiraku tried tilling the ground while thinking about rice, and while it managed to grow, the texture of the rice was off. Since they have an entire waterway built, he decided to begin building a rice paddy with the elves. After mending the ground for hours, Hiraku released all of the girls' floodgates. Sorry, I meant he released the floodgate and asked the elf girls for their help. All of the elf girls started getting wet and Leah didn't like the slimy liquid. Together, they all bent over and planted all of the rice plants. A few days later, all of the plants were ready for harvest, and Hiraku put them up for drying. Leah was impressed that he knew all of this, but Hiraku's grateful that he always watched a farming idol before he died with cancer. Once all the plants were dried up, Hiraku used his farming tool to create a thresher and showed them how to harvest the rice. The girls saw all the work it took to prepare the rice and wondered if he was finally done. But Hiraku revealed that there's one more step. He prepared to cook the rice and asked Lu to use her magic to light up the fire, so she prepared to release her ultimate blast to burn everything to smithereens. But he told her to calm down, disappointing her. With a small flame, Hiraku cooked the rice until it was finally ready and created it into rice balls for the girls to taste. Lu decided to take a bite.
Fucking hell.
The girls thought it was disgusting and regretted doing all that work this whole time. But Hiraku knew they were lying when all of the rice was gone. He decided to expand the rice farm, and all the girls began cleaning up after they were done. How the f*** does that even happen? Hiraku sees how they can all clean themselves with magic, and wishes he had a bath to clean up. Since he's finally built a waterway, he decided to build a bath, and showed the girls his blueprints for how he was going to design the plumbing. The girls wondered why they would do all this if they could just swim in the river, but Hiraku reminded them that they would freeze in the winter. Plus, he really wanted a bath for health and totally not to stare at them without any plot armor. The girls began building a furnace to warm the water and created the biggest possible bathtub. Everything was going great, but Hiraku wondered what they would do with all the dirty water. Tia thinks that slimes could take care of purifying the water, but Hiraku wondered if they were the dangerous monsters that destroyed adventurers. Tia has no idea what he's talking about, so she flew away and brought some slime for him. He placed a few of them in the water purification area and inside the bathroom. Just like that, their wastewater problem was solved, so he began grabbing firewood to burn. But one of them had mushrooms growing on it. He'd been weary of mushrooms this entire time since they might be poisonous, but all of the girls thought it was safe and wanted to eat all of them, so Hiraku began preparing some logs for mushroom growth. By sunset, Hiraku had finally completed the bath and tried explaining it to the girls, but they wanted to see a hands-on experience. He removed his plot protection and began showing them how it's done. But the girls started to feel a different kind of liquid dripping, so they all removed their plot armor and decided to join him. Lu told him it's perfectly fine for all of them to do it together, and Hiraku felt the bone of his sword growing sharp and hard. In the following morning, Hiraku saw all of the edible mushrooms that were grown. But the dogs had brought over more elves. Of course they were females, but who's complaining? Leah reveals that they used to live together, and he's glad to have them all join him. Leah suggests they work on expanding his home so they can all have more space, and cheers them on to begin children making. Hiraku didn't know why they were so optimistic. What a f***ing waste. Heroes notice that his master's harem has been expanding, and tells us about his story. Before he had a master, he never had a name to go by. Ever since he was born, he'd been roaming alone, and never lost a fight against any other male. His only wish was to continue living freely, but when he met that one female, she destroyed him. After his complete defeat, they began traveling together, but her belly started to grow one day. He wanted to do everything to continue protecting her, but peace wouldn't last, and a giant bear was about to annihilate them. However, after they were gravely injured, the bear walked away. Still, they could no longer hunt for food and accidentally reached the most dangerous place of the forest, the center of it. They saw a human walking around without a care in the world, but Kuro noticed the tool in his hand and felt the limitless power coming from it. They had already made peace with their lives being over, but he began taking care of them. And Kuro noticed the food was made of a gate boar, impressing him that he was able to defeat such a strong monster. After their children were born, they decided that Hiraku would become their master, and enjoyed all of the food he prepared for them. Before long, their children grew up into a big family, and they noticed how Hiraku's harem was also growing. But he still had a single concern. Their master hasn't discovered that they are the legendary infernal wolves, but Kuro thinks that it's fine anyway. He's grateful that his life has led him to such a great life with him. After a few weeks, the new large house was completed, and Hiraku remembered all the digging and wood cutting it took to prepare this house. Even though he knew it would be this big, he never imagined how nice it would look on the inside. They showed him the nice room they've created for him, and opposite his main room was the large dining room. In the back was the kitchen, and on the sides were even more stoves for big meals. Finally, the cellar was big enough to store a lot of food and firewood for the winter. On the second floor, the girls saw their rooms and were glad they each had individual space for themselves. But Hiraku noticed one of the rooms had a giant bolt locking it.
Yes! 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 Yes!
見なかったことにした。
No! No! No!
In addition to his god statues, Hiraku created some dog statues to decorate the entrance of his house, and thought it was shaping really nicely. Inside his new house, Hiraku's gathered all the ingredients for a new recipe. The girls wonder what he's going to be cooking, and he reveals that it's a food called curry. The girls wish they didn't have to taste another one of his shitty meals and would rather be cooked in the pot instead. He went out to harvest some spice for his curry, and the girls realized they've never seen these plants before. This was another power of Hiraku's almighty farming tool. With it, he can grow plants that are really sensitive in any climate. For the spices, he's going to need to come in tia. Sorry, I meant he needed cumin, and he sees that the flower has already bloomed. As for the next plant, he needed turmeric, and with the girls' magic, they dried out all of the spices. Finally, he needed coriander and cilantro. The dogs wanted a taste too, but when they smelt the cilantro, they ran away in fear. After gathering a little more black pepper and cayenne, Hiraku was finally ready to start cooking, but noticed that the girls had gotten bored with his ugly ass and left. At the kitchen, he wondered if Leah was going to be the only one helping him, and Leah told him that her plot's better than the other girls anyway. He ignored her attempts and started preparing the meal. They cooked the meat and tried seasoning it, but Hiraku realized he's been missing something this entire time. It's naan, and he's angry that he managed to forget all about it. They began rolling out the bread together, and after they cooked a mountain of it, his meal was finally finished cooking. All of the girls gathered to try out his curry and thought it looked like shit, but he encouraged them to try it out. Lou and Tia took a bite. It didn't just look like shit, it even tasted like shit, they told him. But they all ran to get seconds, so Hiraku wondered why all of them ate it until they were full. He wondered if they were just messing with him, but what he didn't know is that they were all pretending to like it because they needed a different kind of meat. The winter was finally drawing near, and since they will be spending most of their time indoors, Hiraku spent weeks gathering as much firewood as possible. When it gets cold, Zabuton hibernates at the top of the tree, so Hiraku handed him some potatoes and got extra blankets for the winter. Leah was bent over as always. He saw the other girls piercing a needle through the hole of his meat. Don't search that up. Hiro and the other dogs won't be able to hunt well, so they're doing all they can to eat Tia's pink meaty flaps out. With all other bases covered for the winter, he wondered how to preserve the vegetables, so he created a box that will be covered with a blanket and will allow for the snow to act as a freezer. Even with all his genius tactics, he wishes he could use magic, if even just once. At night, Lou tries teaching him how to use an ignition spell and explains that it's natural he can't summon a difficult golem on the first try. Hearing this, he thinks she's amazing for being able to summon multiple golems at once, but Lou tells him that her plot is better than Tia's. Hiraku thinks all of them are amazing for using magic while he can't do anything but gardening. But Lou tells him that he's the most amazing one here. Without him, this entire village would fall apart, and he's able to continue feeding them every single day because of how hard he works. She tells him that he's the only one who could do this and smiles at him. The winter's first frost arrives, and snow began piling up. With all the time they were spending indoors, Hiraku decided to build a few classic games, reversey and chess. He taught them how to play the game, and Lou thought it was too simple to be enjoyable. But Tia told her that those simple rules will allow for complicated challenges. He told Tia that she was right, so Lou grew angry and tried challenging Tia for a game. After 2 hours, Tia was about to be absolutely destroyed, and Hiraku noticed her hands shivering, but she pretended to have her hands slip. She apologized because they were going to have to start all over, but Tia uses her magic to make all of the pieces fall exactly to where they were. She tells her it's embarrassing that she's playing like a child, and Hiraku tries to see how the others are doing. He sees the 2 other girls playing reversey peacefully, and Kuro points out where the best position possible would be. It shocks him how Kuro can understand the rules, but sees the other wolves playing chess correctly, and even though it may look cute at first glance, he feels an intense aura emanating from them. Lou decides to play a game against them because she definitely won't lose, but the game doesn't end well. All 4 of them play mahjong, and Hiraku thinks he has the upper hand because of how complicated the rules were. So he tried to get revenge for Lu, but all of the girls completely destroyed him. Poor Hiraku and Lu have both been clapped. After a few weeks, they were bored of board games, so Hiraku designed bowling equipment from wood. Even though it was just a simple game, all of the girls enjoyed it, and so the winter days began slowly going by. The creative refrigerator he created was working, and they were able to enjoy their delicious food until snow finally melted and spring came. But while he tried enjoying the nice warm temperature, Zabuton sounded the alarm to alert them of a giant monster approaching. Hiraku looked at the sky and noticed a giant dragon flying towards them, but Tia told him that this wasn't a dragon, it's a wyvern. The wyvern roared in the sky and began preparing a fire blow to destroy the tree, but Tia barely managed to fend it off. Some of the fire still landed, and Leah rushed with the others to put it out. Hiraku wondered what he could do in this situation, and wanted to do anything possible to protect everyone. As he clenched his fist, a spear appeared, and he pointed it towards the sky, throwing it with all of his power. The spear clashed against the wyvern's defenses and pierced through them, ripping the wyvern's wings apart. It flew back for Hiraku to send another strike, landing a direct hit onto the wyvern's chest and sending it falling to the ground. Deep inside the forest, Hiraku found the dragon's corpse and wondered if someone had sent it to attack them purposefully. But with wyverns being such a rare and valuable creature, Tia thinks it was just a wild monster acting alone. He thinks it was an unfortunate incident, but wonders if they could eat its meat. At home, Tia says that wyvern meat is one of the rarest delicacies in this world. Hiraku finished preparing the wyvern steak and created a stew out of the tail meat. All of the girls think this is the first time Hiraku's cooked something good, and he's glad that they're finally impressed. Lu still thinks something is off, and wonders if Tia would have been able to defend an attack from Hiraku's spear, but she tells her that it would be impossible since it could defeat a wyvern's barrier. Hiraku asks them what they're talking about, wondering if it's because he didn't take all the bones out. Tia says that it's nothing, they weren't talking about eating his bone or anything. Meanwhile, inside the demonic kingdom, the higher-ups have received news of the wyvern being defeated. It would require an entire organized force to somehow take one of them down. But the count reveals it's the truth. The generals panic and are struck in fear with how that occurred, and one of them even wants to resign. Inside Drime's lair to the south, Gucci saw the attack with his own eyes, and thinks Hiraku's spear would pierce even the king of dragons if they attacked it. The next morning, Hiraku thinks there's something they're still missing after all this time with their meals: PG grape juice. He gathered all the elf girls to harvest the grapes, and in order to crush the juices out, he built a contraption for them to step on the grapes. Tia and Leah begin sinking their feet deep into the balls and crush them until the sticky liquid comes out. They manage to fall on top of each other and see that they've been covered with the creamy sticky liquid. Wondering how they could manage to keep their rhythm while they do this, one of the elves suggested singing a song like they used to. The juices begin coming out, and Tia tells Lu to join in with them along with Hiraku. They spend the entire day juicing out the grapes, and they've left yeast on top of the barrels so that it could begin fermenting. He wonders if they've made enough, and the god of the world shows the other god how much fun Hiraku's having, and begs for forgiveness. However, the god of agriculture tells him that he managed to end an innocent human's life, and send him into the deepest parts of the forest of death. Not only that, but he also gave him the holy lance grime and tried disguising it as a farming tool. It would normally suck all of a person's life force out and kill them instantly, but the god thinks that he's given him such a healthy body that he'll be able to regenerate his life energy right away. But even more than that, she wonders why the statue of her is an old man, so as punishment, she will force her dad to sit like this for 300 years. On a random day, Zabuton sounded the alarms, and Hiraku felt like he was getting deja vu yet again. Lu recognized the girl as her sister, Flora. After hearing that her sister was chased by the black-hearted, ugly, disgusting angel, she followed her sister all this way. Tia tells her to repeat that once more. Hiraku invites her to stay here, but she's having a hard time believing that this ugly bastard is her sister's husband. Kuro warns her to be respectful, and she tells her that he's the master of all these infernal wolves and even took down a wyvern. This is the first time Hiraku's heard that they were infernal wolves, and wonders what the infernal part means. Kuro goes on to show off his abilities, letting him know he's the best pet. As an apology for having the wolves eat her out like the other girls, Hiraku's prepared her a nice meaty dinner, but she loves the soft white liquidy stuff. He tells her that it's just tofu made with some soy sauce that was made from fermentation. but she has no idea what any of those words mean. It's become clear to Hiraku that they have no idea that there are microorganisms that cause fermentation in this world, so Flora tries to research it and thinks this would solve a lot of problems. After staying for a few days, Flora decided to leave and came back a month later. Along with her, she's brought an entire army of maids, and they tell Hiraku to use them however they want.
That's not fair! That's not fair!
Tia notices that she's the only one who hasn't brought a lot of her own kind. In order to stay competitive, she went flying off and returned that night with 3 other angels and an entire fleet of lizardmen. Along with all of the new citizens, she's brought chickens, and Hiraku is glad to see this place getting more civilized. The maids belong to a race of ogres, and they help do all the chores. However, he noticed that none of them know how to cook any food, so he began teaching them how to prepare many different kinds of meals. Seeing the nice food, the maids began experimenting with the meat to prepare the best meals possible. On the other hand, Tia's 3 angels began patrolling the forest to keep them safe, and the lizardmen began taking care of the hard labor to speed up construction. Their leader had a scarf so the villagers could tell them apart, and Hiraku noticed that this place is starting to grow exponentially. Speaking of the devil, Ria comes in and tells him she's brought the rest of the elves that were roaming the forest. The f***ing cuck wonders where any of the men are, but she tells him that they conveniently all died in the forest, but it's okay, because they can start making more men now.
うまくいくといいな。やはり方法は聞かないでおく。
復権派の仲間にダイナにクルーガーに
A few days later, Hiraku asked all of the representatives to gather and apologize for calling them all of a sudden. Since this place has been growing and a lot more people are moving, it's starting to become like a village, so he wanted some help coming up with a name. One of the maids suggests naming it after the forest, but with the name Forest of Death, Hiraku thinks it would sound like a ghost town. Zabuton pointed towards the door and Hiraku opened it, seeing the giant tree at the center of it. It was then that he named this village the Great Tree Village. That night, all of the citizens celebrated naming their village, and hosted a party and opened the first barrel of... All of the girls chanted the word mayor, and Lou told him that he's the only one for this job. This night was the beginning of their new life as citizens of the Great Tree Village, and all of them enjoyed it by drinking the PG grape juice. Tia was wasted and begged him to sit next to her. She asked him why he was sitting alone, but he told her he was so happy that it felt like a dream. But it's not a dream, Tia told him, and they're going to live together like this their entire life. She tells him to raise a toast to their new village, and Lou wants a toast too. Hiraku wonders how many years it's been since he's found happiness, and thinks he's going to give it a shot as mayor. By the time summer arrived, the number of residents had increased once again. Eventually, a representative from the demonic kingdom appeared and introduced himself as Beazle, offering Hiraku a bottle along with a message from the demon lord. He wanted to discuss the status of the settlement here, so Hiraku wondered if they were trying to get him to pay taxes or kick him out. He wondered if he should ask Lou or Tia for advice, but Lou winked at him to handle it on his own. Hiraku built up courage and informed the messenger that he will gladly pay taxes, saying that he will be paying only 10%. Hearing those words shocks Beazle, and Hiraku wonders if he messed up, but Beazle accepts his conditions. As he drafted their agreement on a piece of paper, the business magnate purposefully made it so he only pays taxes on crops. But still, he was worried he was too aggressive with negotiations, so he sent Beazle home with a gift. He wonders if he handled everything well, and Lou thinks he did an incredible job, because now they will have protection under the Demon Lord's army. Tia agrees, but thinks that 10% is too low, as settlements usually pay 50 to 60% in taxes. And since they're only coming once a year to collect taxes, they can lie about how much they produce, so Hiraku just created a miracle of a deal. Inside the Demon Lord's castle, the generals are shocked that the Great Tree Village submitted so easily, but are suspicious that they might be having an ulterior motive. Beazle acknowledges that possibility, but he had no choice since the Angel of Annihilation, along with the Princess Vampire, were standing right next to the mayor. But that's not all. There was an army of high elves and a pack of inferno wolves, and even the trio of killer angels patrolling the village. Beazle shakes in fear, knowing that he could never refuse their hard negotiations. He investigates their gift and sees the apples inside, so one of them tries to check if they're poisoned, but Beazle notices another oddity in their gift. The cloth is made from a great demon spider, a monster so powerful that it drove the previous demon lords to a standstill. Randon decides he's had enough and quits. The next morning, the ruler of all dragons, Drime, introduces himself to Hiraku and has come with his count to present them with a gift. Hiraku sees the expensive sword inside, but thinks that it looks kind of violent. Regardless, he thanks the man and asks him what brought them here today. The man explains that Drime's lair is directly south of their village, so they consider them to be neighbors and have come here to offer a formal greeting. Hiraku wishes to invite them for dinner, so Drime changes into his human form and introduces himself once more. At night, he enjoys the PG grape juice they've created and begs for more of it, but his assistant tells him to leave before they become a nuisance for Hiraku's village. After they left with the gifts Hiraku prepared for them, he realized that they were going to have a lot of visitors coming through, so the following day, Hiraku began building a guest house for potential visitors. Additionally, he didn't want the angels scaring off any visitors, and whenever Zabuton alerted them of a visitor, all of the lizardmen were ready to head off into battle. It was a long way off from a proper welcome, so he came up with a new signal for visitors using a bell, and created a welcoming party consisting of Tia and Lu, but the head maid wouldn't accept this. His life could be in danger if the visitors were malicious, so they added a bunch of high elves and lizardmen to protect him. And for the visitors that stayed overnight, Hiraku asked Flora to watch over them since she could go for several nights without sleep. As soon as all the preparations were ready, a new group of visitors had arrived from the Howling Village. They wanted to establish trade relations, so Lu decided to take care of this and welcomed them to their village. She asked them if this was their entire group, and their leader claimed that it was all of them. After hearing that, Lu told him that she will be treating the others as enemies, and the men straggling in the forest began screaming. Their leader apologized that some of them were straggling, and Lu told him that it's dangerous having people separated, so they should behave themselves while staying here. After the guests spent the day inside the guest house, Lu locked their door for the night, and Hiraku wondered why they're treating them like prisoners. Tia asks him if he hasn't noticed it yet. Every visitor has always brought a form of gift when coming except for them, so that, along with their troops lurking in the forest, is the reason for lowering their hospitality. The following morning, Hiraku wonders why they're not serving them PG grape juice, but the head maid tells him that this is the difference in treatment for the guests who brought the swords and those who didn't. He wishes they could at least give them more food, but the maid gives him a cold glare. While they ate, Tia and Lu tell him to cast off his sympathy because these people claim to have came here on important negotiations, but they've yet to discuss anything. Even then, everyone was against offering them any wine, but Hiraku still forced them to put wine on the table. While trying to start a conversation with them, Hiraku discovered that they were from a village that made its living from hunting or mining, so naturally, they needed to trade with their neighbors. But with the recent conflict that's prevented them from trading, they've come to the Great Tree Village to open trade negotiations. One of them is glad that they stopped hiding because they wouldn't have been able to enjoy this meal, and Tia slyly asks him why they were hiding. The man tells her that if anything bad were to happen, someone needed to run back and tell the rest of their village. After seeing how she skillfully extracted information out of that man, Hiraku wanted to extract milk out of her plot. Eventually, the leader began negotiating their trade agreement. With neither of them having any currency, they want to be able to trade physical goods. However, since their village is quite a distance away, and the Great Tree Village happens to be in one of the most dangerous places, they ask Hiraku if they would be the ones to come to the village. With such a vast distance to cover, Hiraku considers having Kuro and the other wolves bring the goods on a carriage, so he agrees and asks them what they've brought to trade for today. The man shows him the silverware and glasswork they produce from the ores, and Hiraku thinks that their goods would greatly increase their quality of life. In exchange, they want to trade for food goods, so Hiraku gladly agrees. This was the beginning of their trade relationship, and before they were about to leave, the leader apologized for not bringing a gift when visiting. Their village never had a custom like that, so he promises that he'll bring something next time, but it may not be luxurious since their village is poor. However, Hiraku tells him that size doesn't matter, it's the heart that does. Who knew the professor of quantum physics had a small persuasion in his second life? Before long, their first day of trade with the Howling Village came, and the girls told Hiraku to stay back since Tia will be acting as their representative. Drime agreed to take everyone there in exchange for a barrel of grape juice. Over time, Drime had started coming to hang out regularly for the grape juice and always brought treasures with him, so Hiraku was glad to always see him. He thanked him for the grape juice and took off. A few days later, Tia returned and told Hiraku that they managed to trade everything. At first, the citizens were hesitant because they'd never seen that food before, so she decided to offer them some free samples, and before long, everyone loved it. They even sold the wine that was supposed to be for Drime, so Hiraku promised he would give him even more grape juice tonight. Tia revealed that the mayor asked if some villagers could come to live in the Great Tree Village. In total, there are 20 residents, and they're all young women. How fucking convenient. Hiraku realizes that the village won't have any future because Dr. Riz is actually an incel, who won't develop plot with any of them. He reluctantly agrees, but on the condition that they get at least 2 young men. The following week, the Beast Girls introduce themselves and say they are mentally prepared to be used however Hiraku sees fit, as long as he doesn't abandon them. Hiraku tells her that he's from Alabama, so she has nothing to worry about since they're not related, and tells her that he'll take care of them. He asks her if they've brought the young men, and he sees the 3 young men. This wasn't what he was hoping for, but prays that they will save this village in the future. After a while of living with all the new residents, Hiraku notices how everyone can use magic, even the little slimes. He tries not to worry about the impossible and focuses on farming, but an earthquake shakes the ground, and one of the angels comes to inform him that a bloody viper and a grappler bear are fighting. She warns him that it might start affecting the village, but as she flew him to the site of the battle, he wondered how they would taste. He sees their giant size and asks her to fly him towards them as fast as possible. She rushes him forward, and with a single slash, he eliminates both of them. All the killer angels are surprised he managed to eliminate these legendary beasts with a single strike. At home, he begins cooking the meat using the PG grape juice, and the girls are crushed that their grape juice was wasted. As for the viper, he fried it and thought it tasted just like fried chicken. He notices that he's missing something, and went that night to ask Flora about her fermentation studies. She told him that she hasn't made any progress and has had to rebuild the hut 3 times. Hiraku has no idea how that's even possible, but she promises that she'll keep the explosives to a minimum. The chicken have finally laid eggs, so he begins beating the eggs, adds salt and vinegar, and with some oil, he creates mayonnaise. Just then, a bunch of dwarves appeared, led by a man called Donovan. They've heard about the PG grape juice and apologize because they don't have money, but have the technology necessary to create the best tasting Russian drinks. Using distillation, he gives Hiraku a new form of smoothie, and Hiraku thinks the shit is stronger than how hard his dad used to beat him. Donovan's party ended up staying in the village to create more PG smoothies, and so Hiraku held a party to welcome the beast women and the dwarves that joined their village. Drime is back at it again drinking, and Lou is glad that he's single-handedly making their village rich. His assistant ties him up and drags him away, and the dwarf thanks him for taking them in. While Hiraku drank, he realized that there's finally an old man besides him here, so he tried asking him if any of those girls caught his eyes. The dwarf man thought they were all pretty, but he's more into women with full beards. Hiraku realizes that these women might end up having to see his small persuasion after all. The following morning, a dragon flies directly towards the village, and Hiraku tries to take it out before it causes any problems. But Drime comes to knock it down. A 3rd dragon appears with a menacing aura, so Hiraku launches his spear to save Drime. In the last second, the dragon barely dodges, but Drime's assistant lets him know that they're not enemies, surprising Hiraku. He introduces the 2 new women. They are Drime's daughter, Lastismoon, and Mommy Milker's, Graphaloon. And I want to play with those balloons like a baboon. Hiraku asks him why his wife and daughter were here, and Drime tries explaining the situation. He's been constantly sneaking out of his home at night, so Mommy Milkers was worried he was getting some Mistress Milkers. Drime tries explaining that it's all high politics, and Mommy Milkers thinks all of her suspicions are finally confirmed. Drime begs them not to jump to conclusions. After all, he also has a small persuasion, so he would never have the courage to have an affair like that. Hiraku apologizes for making the situation worse, but Drime says it's not his fault and tells them to apologize. Lastismoon apologizes for nearly burning this village, and Mommy Milkers apologizes for nearly burning him to a crisp after he pointed his spear at her daughter. Hiraku is glad that everything worked out in the end, and after he left, Drime asked his wife if she understands what he's been doing this entire time. Despite their lack of numbers, Hiraku's spear alone can overthrow their entire kingdom. Mommy Milkers wouldn't have been able to dodge the spear if it wasn't for Zabuton, an old friend of hers. She tells Lasty that she will be giving her a very important job. She will be living in this village for a while. They can't ignore this kind of power, so she hopes that she will at least make sure that his power will never be turned against them. Drime asks her if she's sure about this, but Mommy Milkers thinks this is the best outcome for Lasty. Hiraku gladly welcomes her to the village, but quickly realizes that she's too powerful, and even her sneezes blow away all her progress. He wonders what dragons can be useful for, so Tia reminds him that dragons like Drime tend to be really wise and knowledgeable, so Hiraku thinks she would be good for diplomatic relationships. The next time Beezle visited them, he saw Lasty and instantly recognized her. She was the infamous crazy dragon of destruction. She asked him what brought him here today, and he tried asking for oranges, but she told him that they were out of stock, so she tried interesting him in some strawberries. Beezle just shat himself staring at her horns, and said he would take 10 boxes of whatever she's talking about. She prepares her order and asks him if he would like her to count them, but the only thing he's counting is the minutes until he disappears, like his father when he went to get milk. Back at the demonic castle, the rest of the generals are shocked that Lasty, the almighty dragon, is among them now. They consider spying on them but realize that they're going to be screwed. With no options left, Beezle plans on using his secret plan. Inside his house, his daughter, Florum, enters the room. He tells her that she will be living amongst them and investigating their military strength. She tells him that she will definitely succeed and teleports to their village. At the entrance, Lasty introduces herself, but Florum already knows how powerful she is. As she walked around the village, Florum noticed that there were many different species: lizardmen, ogres, beastmen, and even dwarfs. Inside their headquarters, she notices the vampire princess is living there, and the angel of annihilation is leading the trio of execution angels. They even have high elves, the ones who kidnap men and prey among them. With them around, there's already almost no chance of their military winning. However, after seeing the inferno wolves and demon spiders packed together, all of the confidence has left her body. Using the chart she's developed, the mayor is the only one left, and he must be more powerful than all of them. She wonders just how powerful this man could be, but sees Hiraku walking by and wonders why such a weak person lives in this village. He asks her if she's lost, but she tells him that she doesn't need a weak human worrying about her. Back at the village, Lasty tells her that she just met the mayor. He may be a human, but he can defeat her mother. Florum is shocked because she was extremely rude to him. As days passed with her living amongst them, Hiraku noticed that she was getting closer to Lasty, but wondered why she was so awkward around him. One day, the slimes began multiplying in number, and eventually one of them began devouring all of their grape juice. All the girls were ready to execute the slime, and they began the first trial and found it to be guilty. Hiraku felt bad for the slime, so he tried letting it off and it began popping up during their feasts. After all, one cute slime shouldn't be a problem. Autumn came around, and while Hiraku was enjoying all the food, he wished he could eat some seafood along with the meal. Florum tells him that if he wants ocean access, he has 100 girls ready to open up their floodgates and offer their fish-smelling pussy. Sorry, I meant if he wanted ocean access, he can travel to the port south of the village to trade for ocean products. Lasty offers to fly there, and the rest of the girls accompany her. They take off, and Hiraku was glad there were people who were enjoying his food this much. 3 days later, a merchant from the ocean city came back with Lasty and showed them all the fish products he has to offer. Along with the fish, he came here to accomplish 3 main goals. The first was to properly greet the mayor of this village, the second was to begin trade negotiations, and the third was to become the official trade ambassador for this village. With his years of experience, he can help the Great Tree Village multiply their profits by several times over, so the girls decide to look at his proposition. After a long day of negotiation, the merchant was ready to leave and was excited to discuss grape juice trade next time. But Lasty wasn't about to let that happen. Hiraku thinks it's great that there's going to be a professional handling their trades, and Lou thinks it's great that they'll be getting more value now. While traveling home, the merchant took a look at the Great Tree Village. When the girls first arrived at Michael's office, he nearly kicked them out because he didn't have any time to deal with them. But his merchant intuition gave him a strange feeling that he can't ignore this. He saw Florum was among one of the girls, and knew his head would have went rolling if he ignored her. He wonders who the other girl was, and she introduces herself as Lastus Moon, the crazy dragon. With the two of them being as prominent and as dangerous as they are, the risks might be outweighing the benefits of trading with them. But he couldn't ignore them. They bring him to the goods they've brought, and he sees the lizardmen, thinking he's about to enter some outrageous talks. After uncovering the cloth, he sees the rare fruit that have been circling the kingdom and knows that each of them can fetch several silver coins. The amount of profits he could make outweigh the risks, and he begins discussing the ocean goods he can supply to them. This is his once-in-a-lifetime chance, so he asks them where they will be delivering the goods to. Their village is in the Forest of Death, and Lasty will give him a ride. He contemplates whether his life is worth the money, and along the way, He meets the 3 great dragons and the Angels of Annihilation along with her army. At least the mayor looked normal, he thought. But the vampire princess showed herself, and when Lasty screamed at him for wanting the grape juice, he lost every shred of confidence he had left. While he managed to survive and make the greatest deal of his life, his old body can no longer handle this. At night, Hiraku prepares the new seafood that he's collected and gives it to all the girls. The following morning, another dragon appeared, and he wondered what this dragon was doing. It launched a fireball deep into the forest, signaling that it wanted to fight Hiraku. He prepared his spear and missed his throw, but it was all a trap to trick the dragon in order to defeat it. Inside the forest, he sees another nut job and wonders why she was trying to burn the forest. Drime flies in and tells him to wait, trying to explain the situation. Her name is Harukan, and she's Drime's older sister. She tries telling him that it's his fault for trying to marry off Lasty. Hiraku wonders what they mean, and Harukan says that Drime wanted to marry her off to the mayor, but Drime thinks it was just the grape juice causing him to say those things. After finding out that her niece was getting married, she wanted to come and find out how strong the mayor truly was. After all, she finds it unfair that a girl that's 900 years younger than her is getting married first, and wants Hiraku to squeeze her plot already, so Hiraku squeezes her head and tells her to get on her knees. Sorry, I meant he makes her play with his log. Sorry, I meant he nearly penetrated her body with his spear. Sorry, I meant. You know what? Never mind. Just spam the comments by saying rip the slime. I can't stop crying. The fake fans will never expect it. While they ate the good dinner he created, Harukan wanted to play the mahjong game, but wanted to bet something on the line, without any physical goods to bet. Hiraku wondered if they would just play some plot removal mahjong, and all of them got excited to play his game. After a few rounds of plot armor removal, Hiraku found himself in a very awkward situation. With his supreme knowledge, the legend thought this game would have been easy all this time, but he was already on his last piece of clothing. The only explanation for this situation is that they were cheating by rewriting the pieces, but he thinks that he's just being a sore loser. At last, his chance has arrived to defeat all of them, but even though he drew the worst tile possible, it doesn't matter. He will not be paralyzed by his fear against dragons, and will do anything to make sure no one sees his persuasion.
Sensational.
Beezle informs the rest of the generals that the ancient dragon Hakuren has also gathered at the Great Tree Village. The demon lord sighs and asks Beezle an important question. He asks him what he should do about his daughter who's been in a bad mood all day. The general thinks he needs to mobilize the army immediately, but Randon's already put in his 2 weeks' notice. After attacking the Great Tree Village, Hakuren became a teacher. She was very skilled at everything she did, but complained about doing every little thing. Because of her laziness, Hiraku began forcing her to dig holes and filling them back in, and after boring her to death, she decided that becoming a teacher was the only thing that she could do. The next day, 3 hot Lamia girls begged Hiraku to save them. Their dungeon in the forest had been invaded by Kuro's grandchildren, which caused them to flee their homes. Since they traveled all this way to beg for his help, Florum told Hiraku to try and help. So in the end, they traded Lamia's precious gems in exchange for their crops, and promised to protect their homes in the future. Finally, Hiraku wanted to request one more thing. Being the beta simp he is, he asked them to put on plot armor if they were to ever visit. With their great strength, they began carrying trading goods in exchange for Hiraku's seed. Sorry, I meant crops because they grow from seeds. Back at the demonic castle, 3 girls gathered underneath the demon lord's daughter and begged her to save Florum from the Great Tree Village. At her office, Beezle teleported to meet with his daughter and asked her if she's been doing well. She tells him to get to the point because she doesn't have any time, and he reveals that the princess has been gathering troops to invade the Great Tree Village. They had begun distrusting her reports, believing that no village could be this powerful. Even the demon lord wouldn't dare stop his daughter, and their day of invasion will be tomorrow. They will be gathering 300 troops, so he was hoping she could find a way to scare them off before they even attacked the village. Florum considers who they could use to scare them, because if they were going to just use Lasty and Hakuren, they would end up just destroying the entire kingdom. But she thinks she has an idea. The next morning, a giant explosion destroys trees in the forest, and the soldiers beg the girls to have mercy on them. They're surprised they're going to be getting 10 boxes of apples for barely doing anything. At the village, Florum introduces the 3 girls from the Demon Kingdom, saying that they want to work to death, but then corrects herself and says they're here to work like their lives depend on it. He wonders why they seem like they've given up on all will to live, but Florum reassures him that they're just emo. Their leader introduces herself as Yuri, and Florum explains that there's no need to treat her with care, and to just use her however he wants to. But he's had enough of girls wanting to be used however they want, so he lets Florum show them around. After he leaves, she tells the girls that she will forgive their transgressions if they begin working hard and keep their identities secret. This means that Yuri will no longer be given special treatment, and she thinks she'll be fine with this new life. After showing them around the village, the girls enjoy dinner, glad that they no longer have to worry about politics in this village. Hiraku's glad to see that they've acclimated so quickly, and Lou comes to see the new girls. But he notices that Lou's size hasn't been changing. She's noticed that her transformation magic hasn't been working all day, but thinks it must be that she's sick. After playing with the Beast Kids for weeks, Yuri had to leave the village before her father got concerned, so she bid the other girls farewell before leaving. Inside the castle, the Demon Lord confronts Beazle and tells him that his daughter has been different ever since she came from the village. She hasn't been useless and has been constantly busy ever since she returned. Beazle tells him that she's likely taking interest in diplomacy and politics. Upon hearing those words, the Demon Lord realizes she might have met a man, and thinks that he will tear the entire nation apart until he finds him. A short while after Yuri left, they began winter preparations, and Hiraku was shocked to see the amazing harvest they had. Last he asked if she could get some of the extra food for her parents, and Harukan wanted to share some with her parents as well. Her father is the Emperor Dragon who lives in the north, and her mother is the Hurricane Dragon that lives in the south. Hiraku thought those names were extremely intimidating, so he wanted to share some food with them. First, Lasty gave food to Drime on her way to Shishido City and dropped off some crops for trading. Apparently, there was a giant monster causing problems for the fishermen, so Lasty decided to take care of it. She thought it was definitely the type of seafood Hiraku was looking for. Meanwhile, Hakurin headed north, and on her way back, she brought even more elves. Of course, they're all f***ing females. Why am I surprised at this point? They're mountain elves, but it's become harder for them to find food lately. Hiraku wonders what to do, and their leader understands if he can't help them since they are strangers. But the Riz Master tells her that he was just trying to think of where they'll be sleeping for the night. He promises he will never give up on them, and the elf leader thanks him and says she will sleep in his bed if he wants them to. But the beta says that won't be necessary. This man unlocks species of women like their f***ing Pokemon in his Pokédex. That night, Hiraku decided to build a men's bathhouse so no girls see his persuasion. However, Florum caught the three musketeers sneaking around the new bathhouse, and they said that they wanted to wash his back. But Florum told them that their plot wasn't big enough. However, she realized it would make more sense since they were as flat as a washboard. Eventually, autumn began fading, and winter was approaching. On one of those days, Hiraku saw that Lou was bedridden, and he wondered why she hasn't been feeling well. She told him that it's nothing serious because it could just be the weather, and that a little nausea and fever isn't a big deal. Senna wonders if Lou's been craving sour foods recently, and after hearing that, Lou realizes that she has been actually wanting tomatoes and sour fruit. Senna told him that a person from the Howling Village experienced something similar, so Hiraku asked her what ended up happening to them. She told him they ended up congratulating her on having a baby. After the winter had come to an end, Hiraku began waking up as soon as the sun rose to start stretching. This had become his morning routine, and he avoided waking up too early since the maids insisted on waking up earlier than him. The slime had managed to sneak into another barrel of wine, and the women of the village were ready for a public execution once more. He had discovered that people weren't accustomed to having a meal during the afternoon, but he wouldn't want them to work all day on a single meal, so he began serving them lunch. After finishing his meal, Hiraku wanted to take on a new project, and began planting all types of roses and flowers so their village felt a little more civilized. Additionally, he had begun creating furniture and toys for the children, even though he's never had any construction experience. As time went on, he began creating swords so that the villagers can have a good form of cardio. Anne wanted to keep practicing, and breathed so heavily that the bone of my sword turned into wood, because of her two meaty shields.
Stop it. Get some help.
Hiraku's wooden sword is also feeling weird, so he decides to go and practice on his own. He tries throwing some daggers, but the dark elf comes to show him how it's done. However, he knows that those small little persuasions can't compare to his large spear. The dark elf says she wants to feel his other spear penetrating her, but Hiraku knows that he's only using this spear to overcompensate for something. After a long day of farming, he bathed alone and tried relaxing at night, but always feels a presence looming over him. All of the girls were spying on him like it's mission impossible, but the only thing he finds impossible is losing his virginity. He screams for help to uncover their locations, and while he's glad that he has people watching over him, he will make sure to seal up those hidden doors tomorrow. The following morning, Senna came to tell him there's a strange man in their village. Next to the great tree, he sees a man bent over and wonders how he was able to make it past all of the angels and even Zabuton. Lou sees the man and recognizes him as the progenitor. Inside their guest house, he congratulates her on having a natural baby, as it's one of the rarest occurrences for vampires in this world. Hiraku thinks this is all great, but still doesn't understand why he was ready to be speared earlier, so the progenitor claims he was drawn by the statues. He's one of the only beings who has lived for over 4,000 years and remembers meeting God just before he was born, but can't remember his exact appearance since he continues erasing his memories to live long. Living next to such a masterpiece would fulfill him, but Hiraku says he can't give him the statue, crushing his spirit. Instead, he offers to sculpt him another one, and the man is ready to be speared again. Before leaving, he asked Hiraku how much this statue would cost, but Hiraku told him that God isn't something he can sell, so the progenitor promised to find a way of compensating him. Inside the great cathedral, the priest welcomed him back after his 50-year-old departure, and the progenitor places that statue inside the best part of the temple. Since Hiraku refused to take a payment, he sent the fanciest piano in his nation as a gift. The girls thought that learning how to play the piano would impress the Riz god, but after they opened it, they realized that none of them can handle the pressure of breaking something so expensive. They begged Hiraku to get an old piano so they could practice on it. A few negotiations with Michael later, and he was able to secure a new piano for the girls. Everyone in the village began practicing together, but Hiraku no longer had any hope of sleeping at night. The big yearly harvest had arrived, and after working the entire morning, Lou invited Hiraku over for lunch. She noticed how hard he's been working, so she gave him an ice cube to make his drink better and tells him not to overwork himself. He tells her that he'll be fine, but wonders if it's okay for her to be walking around. She reassures him, saying that all the girls encourage her to exercise so she has a strong body when going into labor. Even after all this time, Hiraku can't believe that she has a child inside her belly. During dinner, all the girls wonder how heavy the child is, and all of them wish that they could help Lou in any way possible. She tells them that everything is great, but it bothers her that she can't drink any PG grape juice. Zabuton is ready for the baby shower. Inside the mayor's office, the trio of angels inform him that the morale in the village is dwindling, and all of them are about to cave in. So to save them, they beg him to sell all of their grape juice smoothies. Their only wish is to make Lou feel more comfortable, but while Hiraku finds that admirable, he thinks selling all the juice would be a mistake, so he encourages them to continue holding out because it will taste better once it ages a little more. The fiends were excited to hear that it will taste better, but the dwarves weren't. They wondered why no one wanted their smoothies anymore, and Donovan promised he will no longer release the white creamy substance into it. Hiraku explains the situation, and Donovan is glad that his special cream wasn't the reason people stopped enjoying alcohol. Hiraku reassures him that his juice tastes great, but wonders what this secret white cream might be. The dwarf tells him it's a secret, but if he really wanted to find out, they can play a game called Salty Biscuit. Hiraku thought he was better off not knowing. Weeks of peace continued passing throughout the village, but Hiraku was only worried about his wife. It's almost time for her to go in labor, and he notices the flower sitting on the table. It was a gift from Tia and the other angels, one of the rarest flowers that was blooming on an ice mountain. The leader of the Dark Elves came to offer her secret mountain elf medicine. It is the best medicine that's ever been produced, and hopes Lou will be able to use it whenever she needs to. Last, he offers Lou a precious pendant from her father's treasure room. The wolves offer some of the food they hunted, and Zabuton's children wanted to gift her some baby clothes. Anne offers her pudding, Leah offers her a flower crown, and even lazy-ass Harukan offers to peel apples for her. Flora comes in to give her sister some tomato and tofu miso soup, and Hiraku is glad she finally made miso after all this time. The leader of the lizards apologizes for not knowing how to help since they're born from eggs, but offers his blood to help her child grow strong. After receiving all the gifts, Hiraku noticed a wooden mallet, and Lou told him that Donovan created it because it will come in handy soon. After she was done talking, Lou felt a weird sensation in her belly and realized that it must be time. All the maids began rushing towels to prepare for the delivery, and Hiraku found himself feeling powerless as he waited in the other room. Knowing there's nothing he can do, he looked at the great tree and went inside the little cave he had made. The 2 moons shined bright that night, reminding him of his first night here when he watched them alone. He had wanted to live away from everyone in absolute isolation. But now that everyone's here, he was sure this was the life he wanted. Time passed by like a blur, and he felt like he had no memories of what happened after that night. He walked in a haze towards Lu, and laid eyes on her child. She told him to come and hold him, so Hiraku tried to carefully grab him to his chest. As he held him and saw his smile, it all became real to him. He had truly become a father. Back in his original world, he was suffering from an illness, so his only hope is that his son will never experience that pain. He tells his son to grow strong for him, but Lu grabs his hand, saying that they're going to raise him to be strong. They decided to name their son Alfred, and while he was half vampire, he looked just like a normal human. This was the place where he started alone, and was glad that everyone has joined him and continued supporting him throughout this time. Remembering all the gifts they brought for him, he wanted to find a way to thank them for their kindness, so he gathered all the leaders of the village together. They wondered why they were here, so Hiraku went on to show them a reward medal that he's created for them. This was his way of thanking all the people who have been here to build the village. He notices that this is awfully similar to money, and Hiraku explains that his hope is to eventually develop a currency for this village. Right now, all the harvested food is given to him, and he has to be in charge of distributing it to everyone. This would also solve the problem of people's bias towards certain fruit by creating a value for them based on currency. Hiraku wanted to start out by offering these vouchers as a gift that could be exchanged for anything. To each villager, Hiraku handed them a medal, and gave Kuro and Zabuton's families 30 coins each. On top of that, he created all of the coins by hand to ensure none of them were counterfeited. Everyone reacted differently. The dwarves wanted grape juice, others wanted furniture, and the angels traded them for Drime's expensive weapons. Eventually, people began requesting furniture in exchange for their currency, but their value was still obscure. For the children, they settled on renting out the mayor for a day instead. A little while after everything had started calming down, it was finally time for the big festival to celebrate his child's birth. All the girls were finally drinking juice for the first time in months. Donovan and the other dwarves brought a big barrel, saying this was the special barrel of juice they created by combining all of their white stuff from all the salty biscuit games they played. Lou realized that this must be what the mallet was for, so with both of them holding it, they opened the barrel up. Hiraku never thought he'd be cracking a barrel open to celebrate something so fun, so he told everyone to drink up on the house tonight. Drime is back at it again, but his count wants to turn this into 50 Shades of Grey. All the girls enjoy the juice, and Donovan asks him if he likes this new secret recipe. Lou tells him she can't drink anything since she now has mommy milkers, and Donovan thinks his entire plan has been ruined. He had planned on stealing the mayor's wife, but he's got an idea. He asks them to bottle it up so they can drink it soon. But Hiraku thinks it would be great to bottle it up for 20 years so they can enjoy it when his child has matured, and Donovan's dead. All this time, Hiraku had caught on to this dwarf's plan. He knew Donovan's secret white substance would impregnate anyone who drinks it, but because he's such a beta, Hiraku wanted to let him impregnate all the elves in the village with this drink so they can leave him alone. Donovan realizes he's screwed and runs to tell everyone to stop drinking. Hiraku is glad that he's finally done with all this women bullshit. The demonic kingdom have heard of Hiraku's child being born and wish to congratulate them. Their village has grown much too strong, so they believe their only plan moving forward will be to marry Yuri off to one of the people living in the village. Michael has received news of the birth and wishes to send them the greatest gifts to continue having a long and beneficial relationship. Tia has discovered that there were a lot of people still roaming the forest looking for a place to live, and Drime's kingdom, along with the demonic kingdom, have recently had a lot of refugees needing to take shelter after the recent war. In total, it's over 100 people, and Hiraku realizes that their current village likely won't have enough space for all of them, so Lou suggests the perfect solution. They will create a second village for all of them, and Tia thinks the Great Tree Village too will be even better. After all, this village had saved all of them, so they want to do everything in their power to save others in the future the same way they were saved. They all lived happily ever after, until Hiraku executed poor old Donovan. If you felt bad for Donovan, blow this video up with likes to show your condolences. Watch this next video. Till next time, my fellow legendary plot masters.